Chapter 7, the article and the interrogative ma, and then we'll look at the marker of the definite direct object. First, we want to look at the article, and the article is, I'm going to draw a box, and this box, of course, is symbolizing a letter. And usually for an article, we'll put a hey on the front with a patach, and then a dagesh forte in that following letter. And this article goes on at the beginning of a word. And this is normally the way Hebrew will do the article. So if you have a word like king, melech, and you put the article on, you'll put the hey with the patach, and then you need that dagesh forte. That dagesh forte is very important. It keeps this from going down to a vocal schwa, because it will be in the open pro-pretonic position. But with that dagesh forte, it's closed. And being closed unaccented, you can't touch that patach. So that's the normal way you do it. But there's some problems. And the problems, as always, goes back to the gutturals. And that's where the real problem lies. And so now let's look at examples where we have problems because of guttural letters. And the first thing we have here is, the first problem, obviously, is that the dagesh forte and the gutturals, including the resh, simply won't get along. That's just not going to work, and so we're going to have to make some adjustments concerning that. So if the guttural is an aleph or an ayin or a resh, we're going to handle it one way. And so in our example, or one of the examples we have Adam. And now we're going to put the article on. So we have patach, and we go to put the dagesh forte in the aleph. But that simply won't work. They reject these dagesh fortes, and so what we do is we compensate the form. Since there's going to be no dagesh in the aleph, we're going to compensate the short patach by making it a long kametz. And now this is indestructible. When you lengthen a short vowel by compensation, it becomes like a historic long vowel. There's nothing you can do to it. It's indestructible. And so there we go. We have that long kametz, and that's because the aleph, and again, if we had a resh here, it'd be the same thing. Or if we had the ayin here in the first position, you're going to reject the dagesh forte, lengthen the preceding patach to a long kametz. So that's number one. The next one is, suppose we have a word that begins with the gutturals hey or chet. And so the example I'm giving you here is hechal, like this. And now you go to put the article on. You go to put the dagesh forte in the hey, and again, that won't work. But this time, we're not going to reject and lengthen. What we're going to do is we're going to say that the dagesh forte is implicit. It's implied in the hey. So just between me and you, we'll put a little dagesh forte in there. You can't see it. You won't see it. But on these tapes, you can see it. If you look very closely, there's a dagesh forte in there. But we're going to see it as implied in the Hebrew text. So again, that's the way you want to view it. You want to view that there is a dagesh forte implied there in the hey or in the chet. Okay, the next situation is when you have certain gutturals. And the gutturals we're going to be looking at here is chet and hey and ayin. These three gutturals. And not just these three gutturals, but they have to have a long kametz under them. Now again, don't see this as a kametz chatuf. That's something different. And don't see it anything like a chetef vowel. Don't see that either. It has to be, and by the way, this won't apply to a patach or segol. It's got to be one of these three gutturals, and it's got to have a long kametz. When you have that situation, we have another problem, and so let's look at it. If you have a word that begins with a chet and a long kametz, like this, it can be unaccented, like in the case I'm really giving you here, it's unaccented. Or why don't we just, for fun, say accented. It doesn't matter. Either accented or unaccented. It does not matter here. if you put the article here, what you're going to get here is a segol. And this is really sort of a dissimilation. The sounds are being made dissimilar to each other. And so they go with segol in these situations. By the way, Hebrew really does love this combination of sound. And we're going to see this over and over again as we go on in Hebrew. But this kind of combination of segol and long kamets is something Hebrew really likes. And so with the guttural, with the long kamets, you put the article on, instead of getting patach and all these other things, we've got the segol this time, which again is sort of making the sounds a little bit different. When it comes to the hey or the ayin, let's do the ayin this time. What's important here is it's got to be unaccented. With the chet, it didn't matter. With the chet, it could be accented or unaccented. When you come to the ayin, or when you come to the hey, it must be unaccented. And now when you put the article on, again, we'll go to the segol, getting this combination of sound again. So you've got to watch out for that. All right, and then one more situation, and that is, suppose you have a hey, and the hey has the long kamets, and it's also got the accent. If you have this situation, and then when you put the hey on, it's not going to be implied. You're going to have the long kamets here. And again, whether we say this is rejecting or whatever, we don't know. The real truth is it just gets the kamets. That's what we know. So you've got to watch that. You've got to memorize that. So again, very important here as you're working with the article. Okay, these are difficult, and this takes a lot of memorization. So you've got to watch for that. These chapters here that deal with particles, and I define particle in the first footnote here. And these are certain small uninflected elements of the languages, such as articles, prepositions, and so forth. These, while they will follow some of the rules that we learned in the last chapter, and we're really out of the chapters now that deal with phonology. We are now creating forms. We're now in morphology. And so the rules do apply that we did in the first 6 chapters. But at the same time, there is a lot of memorization that must go into these. So you're going to have to study these diligently to master them. When you come to section 3, we get the translation of the article. If a Hebrew noun is without the article, you either want to translate it with the indefinite article of English or just nothing at all. So if you just saw the word king without the article, you either say king or a king, the indefinite article in English. Hebrew does not have an indefinite article, by the way, but if we put the article on here, again, we want to translate that the king. So when the article's on there, we'll use an English article. Next is the interrogative ma. And the way that we attach the interrogative ma to a word is very similar to the way that we attach the article. And so that's why we're putting these together. So let's look now at section 4 on how to attach the interrogative ma. Again, if you have a normal word, and by normal word I mean a word that does not begin with a guttural. Well, what you do is you'll have a makef, and you'll have this ma attached to a word with the makef. You'll have a patach under the mem and a dagesh forte in the first letter of the next word. And this is the way it's normally done. But again, the problem is the gutturals, always the gutturals. There are always problems. They can't be treated like other people. They have to be treated their own way. And so we just have to live with it, and we have to abide by it. So just like the article, if the word begins with an aleph or an ayin or a resh, we're going to reject the dagesh forte and we're going to lengthen. So, and also if the word has the article in the front of it. We'll look at that in a minute. So we have a word like eva, like this. Eva. This word begins with an aleph. So when we attach the interrogative ma, we have the patach. We go to put the dagesh forte in the aleph. You know that's a no-no. And so it rejects, and you lengthen to long kamets. And again, the same would go for an ayin, same would go for a resh. But one thing I do want to point out, suppose you have a word like, again, let's go with davar, nice normal word. And let's say it has the article. There's the article. And now it's going to have the interrogative ma on it. When you have this situation, you're also going to have the lengthening here to a long kametz under the mem, and you're just going to have to memorize that one. So with the article, we need a long kametz, and that's a little different than what you've learned before, but again, you need to know that. All right. Next is, well, suppose you have a word that again has a guttural, like for instance a hey or a chet. Suppose you have a word that begins with one of these, and again with the hey we're excluding the article this time. So again, let's go back to hey chal, like this. Let's go back to hey chal. You have a word like this, and or hey chal, excuse me. Let's change that. Hey chal. Sumerian for big house. Okay. When you have this and you attach the ma, what we have here is the patach, and then for the hey, again we're going to have the implicit dagesh in there, so we're going to leave it as patach. Again, we know there's one there, but you have to get the Hebrew electron microscope out to see it, and it's implied. Okay, and then finally, and this is a much better rule, I like this one, and that is if you have any guttural with the long kametz, so any guttural, so amar, let's try that word. And now you want to put the ma on the front of it. You will have this combination again. You'll go to sigol. So this time it's any guttural with a long kametz, and of course we're excluding resh though. So it's the four major gutturals, the aleph, hey, chet, ayin, any of those. You'll get this long kametz. The translation of the interrogative ma, I give you there in section 5. You'll have to supply some form of the be verb in English. You see the example, me adam, what is or how is man. We have to supply that is there. And so Hebrew assumes a form of haya, which means was, to be, something like this, really to become. And so we have to supply that. So keep that in mind when you're dealing with these interrogative ma. And then in 6, I give you a review of the article and the interrogative ma. Also at the end of chapter 9, there's a review sheet there that reviews them all that you'll see there. So you have the article, and again, I give you all those, and then the interrogative ma. And again, with the interrogative ma, for the first one, for the normal way of doing it, the rejection of the dagesh, that includes resh. But for the other ones that are given, you exclude resh. So the first rule would include the resh, the rejection and lengthening, but the other ones would exclude resh. Keep that in mind. Section 7 is the marker of the definite direct object. You know what a direct object is, but when we say definite, you need to look at footnote 6. A word in Hebrew is considered definite if it has the article on it, that's number 1. Number 2, if it is a proper name. So if you have a proper name like David, Samuel, Isaiah, they're definite by nature, as it were. And then finally, number 3, if the word has a pronominal suffix. So you want to say his word. Again, by the fact that you have that pronominal suffix, it makes the word definite. So again, for a word to be definite, it's either got to have the article, it's got to be a proper name, or it has the pronominal suffix. And frequently in Hebrew, when your direct object is definite, you get this marker placed right before it. It's a et. And it's one of two things. It's usually 8 with a seire, but oftentimes it's connected to the following word with a makef. And so the accent is shifted. Now this is closed unaccented. It goes down not to hirik, but it goes down to segol. Usually seire, when it loses the accent, goes down to segol. Remember that. Okay, and so the example I give you, I have Radaf David et Hamelech. And so David pursued, and then the king is definite because it has the article. And therefore, frequently, not always, but frequently in Hebrew, you'll get that et, that's the marker of it. And that's really nice because, again, when you see that et before a word, usually what you're looking at is a marker telling you this is the direct object of the verb. On occasion, you can also translate it with, but usually it's just the direct object marker. Now notice in the next example I give you, Radaf HaMelech et David. And so there the king pursued, and it's David. It's not that David pursued the king in the second example. Again, David, being a proper name, is definite. It's a direct object, and therefore you get the et. If your direct object is indefinite, then you will not get the et in front of it. And so you can see the example I give you, Shamar ha'ish sus. If it were hasus, we'd say et hasus, but it's just a horse, not the horse. And therefore, there'll be no marker of the et there. Now it's time for you to look at exercise 7 and to do the drills.